absolutely a ton of value to be had, and understand that is a business concept that pervades all industries and both personal and professional finance. So we want to talk about why prices rise, how they rise, what's driving that. I've asked you to look personally. You might have to ask your parents. Some of that stuff you could have discerned on your own. That's fine with me. But let's give inflation some time and attention. So the notion of inflate, you blow up a balloon and it grows, it blows up, it inflates. In the marketplace, in the economy and finance place, it is simply increasing costs. And you really can say increasing prices. You all notice it, you all see it, the gas prices go up and down. That's one that fluctuates. It's a variable cost. It moves constantly. It moves based on seasons when they change gas. And for those of you who may not know that, they have two different kinds of gases. They have a winter gas and a non-winter gas, and they have additives in one. So when they change over, price goes up. You may notice it. They don't tell you, it just happens. And then when they change back over, price comes down. And price changes based on administration, price changes based on OPEC and oil and demand. And there's just a gob of things that kind of influence the price of gasoline that you and I buy at the pumps at the consumer level. So we want to look at the price increases. Is it always greedy for corporations to raise their prices to us or against us? Is it always greed driven? So you have demand and command based pricing, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But inflation can affect us at the business level. Inflation can also affect us at the consumer level. And so those are things the government tracks. And it's not so much about them tracking it. It's more about us understanding it, being able to massage and digest the information, and then apply it in the business marketplace and our own personal lives. And so I gave you two of the metrics there, the PPI and the CPI. And so when we're in business, when we're in the marketplace, and we have to buy natural resources, we have to buy elements to manufacture and produce things. So this would be more on the manufacturing side. Then that cost of buying raw materials, buying even manufactured materials, that cost of buying the goods necessary for us to actually manufacture and make the stuff we do. Maybe it's golf balls and baseballs and bats and gloves and hats and shirts and shoes. So those are consumable retail products. So the cost of purchasing the stuff we need to make a shoe, to make a shirt, to make a golf ball, to make a stadium, the stuff. Well, that's all kind of summarized in that producer price index. So that view, that 20,000 view, comes in and looks at the producers, the manufacturers, the businesses that are building the sport products. And when I say products, I mean the manufactured products. But that could also be the construction of a stadium or a gymnasium or a fitness center or an actual piece of equipment like the calf raise machine or a single dumbbell. There is a cost that somebody has incurred to produce and make that product, whether it be a 50-pound dumbbell or a plate or the shoes you're wearing or the stadium we built, whether it be baseball or soccer or lacrosse. And so those of us in business, we factor in the supply chain the cost. What does it cost for me, the producer, to buy the products to make a given dumbbell? Before I ever get to the point where I sell it to consumer, the producers have a cost that goes into doing that. And again, they're in the private sector. Now, I talked about this just a little bit, and I'm going to continue to reflect on it for about 3 weeks, is that those of us that are in the private sector, we're running for-profit businesses. And so because of that, we're always very conscious of what does it cost me to make a product. Therefore, then I set the price to sell the product, because in the end, I want to make a profit off of the product. And so the whole reason why any of us goes into business is to make money. And without making money, the business can't survive. The business doesn't support our lives, and the business doesn't support the families that work for the organizations. The business cannot grow its stock or its shareholder value without producing a profit or being profitable. So one of the things you must always realize in business is that you must make a profit or you won't survive. Without making money, now not just grossing money, but that's income. But without making money, you won't be able to carry on the business. There's no real value in having a business. Now, we have nonprofit businesses like YMCA's and the boys clubs and girls clubs, and they have a different mindset. It's a service. It's a service at a lower cost point designed to serve community needs. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about for-profit businesses that make a product or many products to be able to sell those products where the gain can be had. We assess the demand, that's marketing and strategy and research. We price the product, we promote it, and we sell it, and there's a gain. And then our stock value goes up. So it is those of us on that side of the business that very much track how much does corn cost and steel cost and concrete cost and oil cost. The raw materials, the elements that I need to manufacture the stuff that I sell, rubber, for example, or yarn, or wood, or coal, whatever it is, whatever chemicals I need to manufacture the products that I have to sell into the marketplace. And as those costs fluctuate, so too then does my cost to make a product, and therefore my pricing become a little more dynamic. If you've ever heard of dynamic pricing, dynamic pricing means the prices often fluctuate based on a number of factors. So for producers, for those of us that not only if you own a business, but you're working for someone in business, we're very concerned in business about what we have to pay for products, raw materials, the necessary products we need to assemble to make our products. And so somebody has to buy all that and manufacture all that and put all that together. It just doesn't happen on its own. So we're very conscious, and that's why we have retail buyers, the big corporations like Nike, for example, or Under Armour. Before they ever make the stuff they make, they have significant people who work for them that are the retail buyers that buy the raw materials and the consumable raw materials that they need to produce. And it's vital that those people do really well, because they're buying volumes of stuff that Nike needs to manufacture shoes, or that Under Armour needs, or whoever it is, and whatever they're making. And so the retail buyers for the organizations are some of the most important people that you'll never hear about. And they work behind the scenes to negotiate deals all around the world so that the goods and materials can be bought at reasonable prices and be shipped in to the manufacturing plants and put in the supply chain to make the products. But those prices are tracked in the PPI, which you never hear about because the news only promotes the CPI, because that really hits the consumer. You would have to go more into industry. You'd have to watch the industry business news. If you watched, I don't know, Stuart Varney or some of the other business news sources or networks, there's probably some great alternative ones. I have 3 or 4 that I listen to that are of interest to me. But you can find them, the business reporting news networks. Bloomberg has some good sources, not all of them, but some good ones. And then you'll hear more about the PPI and its effects and impacts. And those are really most vital to those of us who are in management and those of us who are in ownership. Those that work for the organization, depending upon what level you work, you may not even be affected by that or interact with that. But beyond that, for those of us that own businesses or are in executive level of management, tracking where the PPI is going is vital to my organization making a product at a reasonable price and selling it for a reason. The truth is, I can only sell it for so much. And so if I know my price point has some variation, then I have to be able to manufacture it at a given cost. And when I recognize my cost goes up, I've only got so much room, so much beta to play with on the price side to be able to make my market share. And that's important to us. That stuff changes and inflates. We're going to look at some inflation here. But the one that really kind of hits consumers the most, that you're probably much more familiar with, is the CPI, and that's your Consumer Price Index. And that's basically the tracking by our government or government agencies of consumable products. Now what they do is they take a basket of products. I think I noted in the handout for you, it's called a market basket. They identify 20 things that are probably the most popularly consumed by people on a regular basis. Fuel and food, and there's certain energy costs. And so they've got this cadre of mix of things they put in the basket, and then they track those regularly for a couple of years. And that CPI rate is then reported. It's reported publicly on a quarterly basis. Probably the more accurate reporting is a quarterly. They do some semi-quarterly, even monthly fluctuation reporting. But the real accurate, meaning they spend more time, the Office of Budget Management, OMB, and several other organizations inside the government that you're probably not familiar with. They're the ones that kind of track the economics of society, but they're the ones who crunch the data and twist the data and massage the data to come up with the CPI rate. I think the most recent one was 5.1, 5.2. They're in that 5.4 range. Now it's jumped tremendously. It used to be a couple of percent. Whether or not it's accurately reported, that's a different discussion, but we can reflect on the numbers that are reported today. And the most recent ones that came out were 5.2 or 3 or 4%. And so what they're saying is over a given year, the cost of living has gone up 5%. Now again, if that's accurate or not, that's a different story. Do they consider all the necessary things in the basket? How often do they change things in the basket? The truth is they don't tell you a lot of that. You'll have to dig deeper to find some of that out. But we can take the data we're given, we can take the information we're given and make some determinations about it. Now, one of the applications here is that this index is weighted, and it's weighted based on the things that supposedly you use the most. And so hopefully they've got your best interest at heart. The truth is, I don't know if government always has your best interests at heart, so I can't be certain of that. In my 50 years, I've seen a lot of peculiar things with government. But I do know, for example, that they track fuel, and when fuel is $2.99 a gallon, they factor that in there, and they know that's a much more consumable. So they're looking at the fluctuations of oil and petrol and the petrol dollar and the fuel that we use much more than, say, salt. So they're not in the basket. Salt and iron ore and like a block of gold, those aren't in there because those are not commonly consumable items in your everyday average life. But fuel certainly is one. Energy, there's a cadre of energy ones that are built in that. And hopefully they're being accurate as they put together their market basket for us. I've seen CPI rate as low as 1.4% back in the 80s and 90s. And basically life was almost static, meaning year over year, the cost of a given good had such a little price increase. It wasn't really well felt in the marketplace. You couldn't really see that differentiation, and that's good because our incomes don't always go up tremendously on an annualized basis. For a lot of us, our incomes are steady, or we might get a little 2 or 3 or 4% raise every year, every couple of years. But unless you take a second job or do more things, you have a side hustle. If you're relying on one income, for the most part, employers don't really continue just to give increases because they feel good about you. That's just not how it works. And so knowing that our income is static, it really is advantageous to recognize that a static CPI or a static cost of living or cost of doing business is equally beneficial. It would be terrible if my income is static and the cost of living is going up, which is actually what we're experiencing right now, is that in the marketplace, they'll talk about it in the form of wage, but wages have been static and the cost of living is going up. And when you have the cost of living going up and you have a static wage, what that really means is you're falling further behind in your ability to keep up with life in itself. And that's inflation. And so we compare the cost, the CPI, the cost of goods to our income. And what we recognize is that if I can stay above water, if my income continues to surpass inflation, if I'm gaining or making 5.4% or more a year, then I'm actually ahead of the game. But anything less than that, I'm falling behind. So as a business individual, I recognize as a businessman that I now need to do things to make sure that my income surpasses the cost of living, or the cost of living will overwhelm me and overcome me. And when you have children, you buy a house, you start doing investments, and then you really got a cadre of mix of things you're investing in and pouring into. And you got to be even more meticulous and strategic. Remember the proverb, I got to really plan. I tell my money where to go, and it goes there, and then I make sure. So I'm a good planner. I plan it strategically. I plan for gain. I plan for those sort of things. And generally, we profit from that. And so, again, it's good to be a planner and to be strategic, to study those kind of things, to be prepared in those kind of ways. But a lot of people today are feeling the crunch of increased cost of living. And so when their wages don't go up, and the cost of power, gas, light, and water, the cost of food goes up, the cost of just everyday life goes up, then they fall further behind and they feel the pinch and the squeeze. And so today, in today's environment, we have families working 2 jobs. And so sometimes in the household, whereas in the 70s and 80s, the husband would work and the wife would stay home. And so you had a 1-income household, for example. Today you've got both parents working more so, or even dad working a second job, or maybe mom sometimes. It's not gender specific. So you've got 2 and sometimes 2.5 incomes coming into a household to sustain the household. Whereas 20 and 30 and 40 years ago, it didn't require as much time away from the home. It didn't require 2 and 3 or 2.5, 3 incomes, that kind of thing. So the challenge of sustaining life is that we recognize that the cost of living is becoming more extreme. The costs are going up, and therefore my demands for income are becoming more heightened. Now, one of the small caveats to that is indebtedness, and we haven't really talked much about that. We'll probably get to it eventually, probably toward the end of the term, but the obligation of making debt payments makes that a lot harder. And so, of course, Dave Ramsey's pretty popular today about live within your means, you get out of debt, and then stay within the income you have. There's a lot of freedom. Obviously in the Bible, I haven't gotten to it yet, but there's a proverb that says debt is really slavery and you're enslaved to the borrower. The lender, the borrower is enslaved to the lender. And so there's truth to that. There's truth that you're weighted down and you're overburdened and you're oversubscribed when you're carrying a lot of debt, what's called, and then you have to service the debt service by making payments. And so the goal is for you is to try to stay as debt neutral as possible, debt free, get through college. I know some of you got to borrow on student loans. Government will give you a real nice long, what's called amortization schedule. They'll stretch it out when you get done. They'll try to make your payments low, and then you try to pay it off as quick as possible and get that off your balance sheet. That's an obligation. Get that off of your life, and so that the more money I make, I can invest it, I can save it, I can give it to the church, I can take care of the poor. When I come across poor, it's nice to have dollars in your pocket. And when you're broke all the time, you can't buy me coffee and you can't take care of the poor guy, then you're in a terrible situation. So I would encourage you to do both. I like Starbucks, and the poor guy needs taken care of, according to the Bible. So yeah, so those are both good things. And so debt obligation is the worst thing you could possibly incur, because then what happens is you're forced to make scheduled payments, and your income then is further divested out into other buckets, and therefore you have less availability to make investments or to make atypical purchases, where normally the typical purchases are paying for my living, paying for my bills, and the atypical purchases would be getting some new clothes or a fancy new this, or maybe tickets to go to one of the playoff games, where it's not something you'd regularly do, but when I have enough money, I can go do that. And so the debt service, the debts that weigh down my life prevent me from enjoying some of those other things. And so you need to start saving money for Coffee with Dr. Briggs. You need to save money for the poor people in life. And you need to not get indebted, because it'll overburden and weigh you down, and it'll enslave you when you get out of here. Having said that, sometimes in financial aid matters, you got to borrow a little bit of money to get a college degree, and the value of the college degree pays off. There's research that says you'll make 10 times more in your life when you have a college degree in the first 10 years than when you wouldn't have a college degree. So just looking at the first 10 years out of college, you go, it's worth it to have a small amount of obligation, because I'll be able to pay that off in a 3 or 5 or 7 year period, and then I'll benefit, and I have my whole life to advance in my career. And then maybe you'll get a master's degree or even a specialized degree. CPI. There were 4 particular problems with CPI. This kind of gets you a little bit deeper into thinking about it or looking into it. And so I put those little boxes on the right, and those little boxes were questions for you to ask yourself, ask your parents, because your parents probably did a lot more purchasing in the last 10 or 15 years in your life. Some of you are still in diapers 15 years ago. So we need some help to answer some of these. And so let's look at number 1. And number 1 is new product advancements, new product developments. And so because the CPI is only recalculated every 2 or 3 years by government, sometimes it's not inclusive of new product releases that come across the marketplace. Now, the government does a significant refiguring of the market basket every 20 years. And I do have that noted there. I know they make adjustments every couple of years, but a significant recalculating every 20 years. So across 2 decades, then you can imagine the new product releases that aren't in consideration, that either improve life or have a detriment on life. So the question here is, what are some new products that maybe 10 or 15 years ago we weren't purchasing, we weren't interacting with, we weren't using, that now that we are? Can you name one, Jesse?
My mom said smartphones.
Okay, that's a good one. So smartphones in 10, 15 years ago, she wouldn't have been buying it. She wouldn't have been buying the service. So now that's one that's probably most of us would have come across that. And therefore, that's probably one that should be added into the basket, because most upper class, middle class, and even a good bit of the lower social class today have access to phone, telecom, internet, and some of that stuff. And so, yeah, that's probably one that the CPI doesn't factor in, and it probably should factor in. What's another one? Yes, Sam?
Streaming services?
Yeah, so streaming services. In the old days, we paid for cable, and we paid for bundled cable, and so now cable companies are being parsed out and split up, and some of them are being bought up. And so, yeah, so streaming services, most households today, I would assume if we surveyed households in Greenville, most households probably have 1, 2, 3 streaming services that they're not paying for regularly. And so I don't care whether it's $5.99 a month for Paramount, or maybe it's whatever, $14.99 a month for the non-commercial Netflix, whatever. But yeah, so those are obligations that are now normalized. And so they put it on a debit card or a credit card, or they're drafting. And it's now, if you add those up, it's probably $20 to $30 a month extra that we're now paying for that we wouldn't have paid for. That's probably another one that could be considered, although it's more of an entertainment aspect. But I would assume a majority of people that have access to phones and other devices are also simultaneously subscribed to services. Sam, that's a good one. Somebody else, raise your hand if you're sure. Zeke, was that a no? Okay, all right. Anybody else?
Laptops and stuff like that, like personal computers.
Okay, well, so they've been around for a little while, but certainly the laptop. So we started with PCs in the 90s, and these big towers and these big units, and they've been condensed down, they've been, serviced down, and we do have these portable, transportable devices that are far more efficient and portable. They're far more easily portable, and therefore more people have them. But not only that, but our lives are so wired into the virtual reality of not only the business world, but just living life through virtual and the internet. So we do most of our business, we do most of our pleasure, we do most of literally we've basically moved life from the concrete into the virtual abstract. And so there is a demand for most people to have multiple devices. Again, I bet if we surveyed households in the Greenville area, we would find most households have multiple devices and portals into the web, and everybody's probably got some kind of a laptop at the house. Yes, it's a good one. Anybody else? So some new products that I made just in my notes this morning. I go through this every year to see if there's some new ones, but high def TVs weren't very popular. Services like Uber and Lyft, stuff like DoorDash and Shipt, where you can order your groceries, somebody brings it to you. And that seems to be very popular in today's society. I can't say that the entire segment is using it or even a majority are using it, but certainly electronic processing of transactions. We do more transactional business electronically than we do in person. Going back 20 and 30 and 40 years ago, you had to do everything. You mailed it in or you went and did it. You had to go to the DMV and you had to go to the bank and you had to go to CVS and you had to go to Radio Shack and you had to go to the different places to transact business. Now we do most of our business, or at least a larger portion of it online. I don't have to go to the power company. You had to go to the power company and pay the power bill, and then the cable company and pay the cable bill. And because there was a time when they wouldn't take mailing payments. You had to drive up. They had drive-through windows just like banks. And I remember doing that myself, and I remember my parents doing it in the 80s. I remember I started doing it in the 90s when I owned my first property. And you had to go to the water company and make that payment. And they wouldn't pay ahead, and they weren't doing drafts, and all that was unavailable to us. Anybody else? Okay, number 2 is product improvements, or the alternative is the declines in products. What goods in the marketplace have your parents or have you seen improve, or have you seen come in a decline over the decade? And it can be at both ends. James?
Kind of like what that last section, or the last question talked about, a lot of technology, TVs, phones, and streaming devices and stuff.
Yeah, it's evident that technology has been advancing for a couple of decades. First of all, it started and became an industry. Now it's a very robust industry. It's probably one of the top 5 or 6 or 7 industries in the world. So certainly that's an easy one to target. That's an easy one to see, and the CPI doesn't factor that in. And the more that our lives are moved into a technological life, your dependency on that, your dependency on the efficiency of that, but the cost for that will continue to be incurred. Somebody's got to pay for all that living our lives through transacting through the internet or through IE or through some virtual means. And so you're going to be charged for that one way, shape, or form, whether you know it or not. Yeah, somebody else. Yeah, just.
Like appliances in general, like they're made cheaper.
They are, and I had that one written down. Kitchen appliances.
Like stoves and stuff, they used to last like way longer. And now like ovens you have to replace.
Yeah. Yeah, when you own residences, you'll quickly find that out. Your disposal goes out in 5 years, and your ice maker will break in 5 years. Your dryers and washers, they don't last nearly as long. Certainly in the older days, those things were made to last a lifetime. And now they're, I don't want to say intentionally made to break, but it certainly seems like they're made to wear out quickly and break down. So then you have to replace them more often. You have to replace more parts, you have to have more service. Well, that maintains those businesses and those growing industries. The more you have to service those things and buy new ones and trade them out, it's just more costly. And that is not at all factored in the CPI. There's a tremendous amount of money we spend on replacing broken technologies, and appliances certainly is one of them. Yes?
I put vehicles, so like cars nowadays are so hard to maintain by yourself. Like you used to be able to buy a car and fix it at home if you needed to. Now you have to take it somewhere and get it serviced or whatever.
Yeah, so cars have computers in them, and so most of us aren't computer techies in here. So you're not servicing your laptops. You're not servicing your phones. Most of you don't take apart your tablets, and so certainly now that we put computers in cars and computers in houses and computers in boats and in planes and submarines. Somebody's got to work on those, and they're going to charge you a lot of money to work on them. Now, I don't even know about the electronic vehicles, the EVs that are coming out. I have no idea, but certainly you've got to train specialized people that have those kind of skills to work on those. And you're right, that's not you and I. My dad taught me how to change oil, change tire, change an oil filter and an air filter. And in the old days, some of the first automobiles I owned, they were so easy to get to. Now you can't, those things are all wound up in the middle of the engine, or you just simply can't get to them. You've got to take your automobile, and the first thing they want to do is plug the computer in of your car to another computer, and they charge you $100 just to read your car, to tell you what the different lights that are on the engine, check engine lights on, and they charge you $100 just to even tell you what the problem is before they get to it. Yeah, all that's built in. The cost of automobiles has risen tremendously. I don't have a graphic on that, but I'll show you a couple graphics, but that's certainly one. Somebody else, yeah, Jesse.
The other side of that, like cars are a lot more safe, I feel like now.
I don't know, are they? We would have to look at, the data to determine that or not. I mean, that's the assumption. The assumption is the cars, the boats, the motorcycles, the planes, they are safer. I mean, I would hope so. We weren't, but in the 70s and 80s, seatbelt laws weren't required. So you may say, well, there was more deaths in the 80s, so cars have to be safer. Well, no, we weren't required to wear seatbelts. If we wore seatbelts in the 80s, you may find that the numbers are way down. So it's hard to make some of those assessments. In the 80s, we, as kids, we were allowed to ride in the back of trucks. Well, today it's against the law, so kids get thrown out, they get killed, so maybe if we didn't ride in the back of trucks, there wouldn't be as many kid deaths. I don't know, it's just, so the data, you really gotta look at the data, but I would like to hope that automobiles are safer, planes are safer, boats are safer, stuff like that, yeah. Sam?
Just kind of hitchhiking off of like what Jesse said about appliances, like clothing. Like for instance, I have a lot of Nike stuff, and I have to buy a new pair of Nike shoes every 3 months. Whereas like my dad has a pair of boots, from 1982. So, and then I'll buy a pair of boots and have to buy a new pair the next year.
Yeah, my dad had an old pair of work boots. I would swear he had them for 80 years. It seemed like, it was not nearly that long, but it just felt like that. It felt like when he bought them, they looked old and they were worn and they just lasted. They were just durable. Products today don't seem to, Sam's right, they don't seem to have much of a durability. Now again, is that intentional because I sell more product? If I don't make it as durable and therefore you have to come back more often, or because I'm buying cheaper raw materials, because I'm buying from China versus South America versus American made, I don't know. There could be a number of factors there, but certainly that I have to buy more clothing, that I have to buy more footwear is probably not factored well into the CPI. And we see a continuing decline there. Yeah, so, James, you have a hand up?
I was gonna say also cars typically last longer now as well. They can get more miles per the car and whatnot.
Is that the case? I don't know if that's statistically that's the case. Maybe it is. Yeah. That's interesting.
It's better gas mileage most of the time.
Well, certainly better gas mileage. So now better gas mileage is really the short-term benefit is I don't have to spend much now, but cost of gas is up. When I was a kid, gas was 89 cents a gallon. Now it's $2.89 a gallon. So what's the difference there? I get more mileage on most vehicles, but I've got to pay more. So is it a trade-off? Again, you'd have to run the numbers and look at the data and then really make an accurate assessment. Again, the hope is to get better gas mileage, and therefore, in that regards, it would help me make my dollar go farther. But what's the difference between gas today at $3 a gallon and gas in 1987 when it was $1 a gallon? What's the difference? It's the same gas, right? Yeah, so the difference is called inflation, and that's what we're talking about here. And so I was looking last night at gas, California, $4.55 a gallon for regular. Premium was $4.95. We're vastly approaching that $3, $4, $4, $5. Now we're inexpensive in South Carolina because we have a very low gas tax. We have a refinery in Columbia, and we're a right-to-work state. So the unions, which often drive the prices up in a lot of ways. So South Carolina is one of the least expensive states in the union, and you see it in our gas prices. In Ohio, my dad is I talked to him on the phone the other day, 50, 60 cents higher like I said, in California, I was just checking last night, they're a couple of bucks now. So, and a lot of factors there, and I mentioned at least 3 of them. Anybody else? Improvements in products or decline in products?
My parents said like portion size, like you get less for your money now.
That's decline.
Mhm.
Yeah, so a product decline is that shrinkflation that I talked about. Is that stuff we buy that's prepackaged, or we're talking about food or perishables, for example. The providers have figured out the creative ways to make it much smaller. I do have a graphic on that, and I always love to show this one. Get that pulled up. Where'd my mouse go? Is the TV on? Now this one's just very blatantly evident. And so, go a little bit bigger. Yeah, turn that light out. Find my mouse. No, I wanna go bigger, I won't let it go bigger. Maybe I should go bigger on the front end. This one here, the cost of the burger. Multiple burgers could be bought, about 20 years ago for $5, and that same $5 barely gets you Big Mac. Or I'm actually quite surprised. I just took my son to Burger King the other night, and the Whopper was, just the sandwich alone was over $5. I couldn't believe it. I had always thought, well, I guess I'd lost track of that. But literally the cost of the inflation in those, and the sandwiches. And I think you would, even if you ask enough people, the size of those sandwiches have come down. So we're just looking at cost comparison. What could $5 buy you at McDonald's or Burger King in sandwich wise versus what it does now? But also the shrinkflation in the product itself is equally evident. I might as well show the other graphic. This is, you know, what you could buy with a $20 bill, and you could even go back further, but you know, just the visual of the evidence, the visual evidence of, I could get a number of products 22, 23, 24, 25 years ago with a single $20 bill. And if I put that $20 bill under my blanket, and 10 years later I took it to the store, it only bought half as much, and 10 years later it only bought 1/10 as much. Now, the challenge is for us to see the difference. Go ahead and hit the lights for us, please, thank you. What is the difference there? I think for many of us it's visually evident, but what are we really talking about? What's the difference? Once you understand that, and then we're really rolling. If I take a $20 bill and I hide it under my bed, and 10 years later I pull it out and then I go to the grocery store and it buys me a lot less, has the $20 bill changed in any way? No, it's the same $20 bill. So what has changed? Other factors in the marketplace. What has changed? The cost of goods have gone up. The cost of goods, the price of goods, the inflation. Something is driving or pulling the cost of goods up. Now, we'll have to drill down into that. It's gonna take us a little bit longer, but just to understand this, the best way to understand inflation is to take money and put it in a savings account or whatever, and then pull it out and try to buy the same products year over year or decade over decade, and then basically you watch your purchasing power, your ability to purchase declines. Therefore, the dollars are being deflated and the cost of goods are being inflated, and so you have that variation. One's going down, one's going up, and I'm losing ground in between. Now, the only way to offset that is just to make more money. Hence, you got 2 income families and 2.5 income families and 3 income. Why did both your parents have to work? To make enough money just to survive. Of 10 and 15 and 20 years ago, inflation didn't do that to them, and then they could survive. So survivability was different then. But survivability today requires us to have 2 or 2.5 incomes in a household. And that's unfortunate, because then it makes hard on raising kids, it makes hard on instilling values, makes hard on And we got kids today that don't know their moms and don't know their dads and didn't have very good childhoods, but parents were gone all the time working. So it's an interesting dichotomy there. And so I actually think inflation's from the enemy, because I've seen inflation destroy the household in ways it is very ungodly. And so the enemy's doing a good job there, and we need to combat that. I brought this from my office. When I was a kid, this was less than a quarter. You could go to the store and they had these in tubs, and like 20 cents you could buy this. I was at Walmart just this week. This was over $1. It's the same. What's the difference there? What's the difference between 20 cents and $1.20? Well, you could say economically the difference is $1, but what's the real difference? Well, the producers have increased the cost. So is the cost of the chemicals more? Maybe. Is the cost of the plastics more? Maybe. Is the cost of packaging it more? Maybe. Is the cost of trucking and shipping it from point A to Walmart? Maybe. And all those could be up percentage points, but it wouldn't drive it from 20 cents to $1.20. So then it's either got to be greed or it's got to be other factors that influence cost of goods. And that's where we want to kind of drill down a little bit further. And let's keep going through our questions though. Let's go to number 3. And so we do have taste changes in the marketplace. So one of the things that influences our standards of living is that our tastes change as you mature and you grow up and you get older. You might like steak today, and maybe when you were 5 years old, you didn't like steak, and you didn't like salads, and you didn't like mashed potatoes. And so now you like to go to the steakhouse and eat all of that, whereas when you were 5 and 10 years old, you didn't like any of that. So yeah, so we have tastes that change, and hopefully they mature as I mature. And therefore, the CPI, if it's only the basket's only being recalculated every 20 years, it is certainly not factoring in people's tasteful changes. What are some examples that your parents might have shared with you? Yeah.
Well, my parents used to be big Samsung people, like Samsung phones, and then recently, in the past few years, they've gone to Apple products.
Okay, and what was the deciding? What kind of taste change was that? What drove it?
Like why they changed?
Yeah.
Just because my dad likes to look at like the small details about phones, and he realized that the Apple is just, yes, it's more expensive, but the actual product itself lasts longer and it's better quality.
Okay, so more value can be derived. That's good. What's another one? Thank you, Kate. Sam.
So like a thing that kind of is recent, my parents would go, for instance, to the hardware store to buy, dog food or anything, and now they just get on Amazon and buy the cheapest one, and then
Yeah.
ship to the house.
Yeah, and is that because of convenience?
Yeah.
You think? Okay, so is that a taste change, or is that an improvement in, let's say, delivery? I no longer have to go there; it can just be brought to me, so it's more convenient.
Yeah, that would be an improvement.
Yeah, so that's not necessarily a taste change, and thank you for mentioning that. But certainly, I think most of us, and I think I would have noted it a time or two earlier, is that the convenience of ordering through Amazon. I mean, Amazon is one of those big improvements that we've probably all taken advantage of. A product improvement is the launch of Amazon, the advancements of Amazon, and our ability. Probably most of our families didn't buy and didn't have Prime memberships and didn't get free shipping 5 and 10 and 15 years ago, and we're all taking advantage of it. That's why Jeff Bezos is one of the wealthiest people in the world, not to mention some other things. But taste changes. What are some other taste changes you might have recognized?
My mom buys like more health conscious food now.
Yep,
Like
I
certain
wrote
foods.
that one down. So alternate grocery stores, like maybe you buy from Whole Foods today, or what's another, Trader Joe's, I don't know what they all are. But as an example, or maybe your parents shop more at the farmer's market where there's a little bit higher price point, but you're getting a much better quality product, you're getting a much better, the value of quality is expressed there. So yeah, so maybe our tastes have changed in the fact that we're buying better healthy foods, particularly for those parents that are buying in the house. Somebody else? Eat more chicken, so you like Chick-fil-A, so you go eat more chicken, whereas 10, 15 years ago you didn't. I noted there that the U.S. was a heavy beef consumer, and and that's actually fallen way down in the more recent years. Vegan seems to be a little more popular today. Number 4, there are substitutional effects, and so sometimes we buy more or we buy less, we buy more because we substitute one for another, and it's often due to pricing. What are some substitutional changes or effects you might have seen in your household?
Stop buying red meat, how pricey it's gotten,
Yeah,
get more chicken and stuff.
so I'm cost conscious. Red meat has gone up, even though we really like it and Dad really wants it, and we just can't afford it right now. So can't afford it, costs too much. It's a little harder to get good ribs or good beef or whatever, so we avoid it, or we replace it with some. So what have they replaced it with?
Anything else?
Yeah, more chicken or more hamburger. Yeah, good. James?
Like when I was a kid, instead of going out and buying a bunch of clothes and stuff, you just get hand-me-downs from friends or
Yeah.
Relatives and stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's still, for a lot of families that have a lot of kids, first of all, hand-me-downs, garage sale shopping, going to Goodwill, those kind of things. We're not shy about doing that. Going to consignment sales, where the parents sell the kids stuff, the toys and the clothes and stuff, and you end up buying from other parents at a very good price. Yeah, we didn't used to do that. Much of that didn't exist. Somebody else, yeah.
So like just buying cheaper brands in the grocery store, not necessarily going to like the name brand
Okay.
cereals or all that.
Yeah.
Just the same.
What would be an example in your life?
I guess like just small snacks, like Debbie cakes. Like I don't care if it's a Debbie cake. I'll take the off-brand because it tastes the same.
Oh, wow,
It's
I don't
cheaper.
think the off-brand tastes the same.
I don't-
Chocolate Little Debbie's, oh man,
Now there's certain ones like oatmeal cream pie cake. You gotta have the oatmeal.
you gotta have that.
But
Yeah.
it's-
Nobody makes that one.
That's dollar store, man. Those are different.
Yeah, like dollar store stuff. It's cheaper and it's.
Have you been to
basically
Dollar
the same.
Store? Most stuff's not a dollar store.
That's true.
You go to Dollar Tree, and they're even having cost increases. There was an article that just came out in the last few
Yeah.
weeks, Dollar Tree has had to raise their prices.
It's $1.05.
But Dollar General, most is $1.05. Most stuff in Dollar General is not $1. Now, a lot there is, but the majority of stuff is not. I've seen some interesting substitutions in my life. So, an academic one was we used to have dictionaries and thesauruses in our offices, big books. You know, now it's Google and Wikipedia, it's the web. And so those are gone. You know, I remember TVs that you had to tune them in. There used to be a lot of static on the TVs. Now you don't get into that. I remember a day when there was a busy signal on a phone. Most of you never even heard of a busy signal before, unless you were on a landline. Of course, dot matrix printers or fax machines or beepers. Now we're substituting those for smartphones, smartphone technologies, and even newspapers are being substituted. We still like the news, and we just don't read newspapers. We have other means we subscribe to media sources. We got free ones. We got subscriber download to YouTube and whatever. You got the zing and ding on your phone, and it's all the different services that you've signed up for that deliver a more real-time set of information or news for you. I remember in the days that we used to buy the cameras, and then you have to buy the film. You put the film in the camera, you take the picture, you take the film to the store, and they process the film and got you the pictures back. Well, all that is built into, our tablets and our devices. So again, it's all, we've substituted. We still like pictures, we still like to do that. We just substitute the way we get there. But it's much costlier. This is a lot more costlier in the camera and some of that than it would be. You'd be surprised at how cheap Polaroid film was way back then. Anybody else? Substitution. So, but the reality is, when we substitute, we're usually trying to save money. But some conveniences actually cost me more. So instead of the hassle of a Polaroid camera and Polaroid film, it's easier just to keep buying and keep new this and have my subscription service. It's probably more costlier. So in that regards, the cost of the good has risen. The cost of it has risen, and it's not being factored into the CPI. All of this requires us to be a couple of things that I've just read about in some of the Proverbs. There's two words I want you to associate if you're not familiar with them. The first one's frugal, the other one's thrifty. And so a frugal person is very economical. They spend very carefully or sparsely. And a thrifty person is just not wasteful. So they like to spend, and they're also conscious of resources, but they're not wasteful in their spending. So what this requires me to do personally and you to do professionally in the marketplace is I'm gonna be frugal, and that means I'm gonna be very economical. I'm gonna plan how we spend in the business, and we strategically plan. We have approvals. You can't just spend unwillingly. You have to have approvals. Yeah, they have to document spending. We track it in QuickBooks or in other forms of tracking methods, so we know how much have we spent on a day, a week, a month, a year. And so we're being frugal with what little money we have, and we're being thrifty, which is not wasteful. One last example, and then I'll let you go. I look up, every year I look up a couple of things. And this year I decided to look up the cost of movie tickets. And I think all of us like to go to the movies. I don't know if there's any good movies out right now. But in 2000, you could take a $5 bill, you could take a $10 bill and buy 2 movies. Now I can't hear if you're packing up. So in 2000, I could buy 2 movie tickets for this $10 bill. And my brother-in-law and I just went to the movies a few weeks ago, and it cost me $12 to buy 1 movie ticket. And so within less than, or by 20 years, this more than doubled. Again, that's the inflation. What's the difference? Well, the movie stars charge more to make the movie, and Hollywood charges more, and cost is always passed down. Are we paying the movie stars too much? Yes. Do we pay Hollywood too much? Yes. So we have allowed inflation to affect us. Here comes Josh. Everybody say hi, Josh.
Hey, Josh.
Hey, Josh, come on in. Got a seat for you right there, bud. And so we've allowed inflation to actually occur. We could stand against it. We could make a stand. But movie tickets, when I was a kid in 1990, was less than $5. In 1980, was less than $3. In 1970, a movie was $1.31. So what's changed? Well, in 1970, they were producing colored movies. Probably the quality wasn't as good, and obviously Star Wars wasn't out back then, and neither was Arnold and Terminator or anything else. Yeah, whatever you watch today, superheroes. But movies were still forms of entertainment. So whether it be $1.31 in 1970 or $12 today, you're still getting a high quality value of entertainment. But again, the difference is going to be what? The difference is going to be what drives the cost to go higher. And that's where we have to go in the next class, is we have to go a little bit deeper to understand, is it just greed, or are there other things that are factoring in? For example, the more people I hire at my organization, the more people I have working for me, the more I expand, the more I have to pay out. The more I have to pay out, that means the more I have to be collecting. So maybe cost increases is because we're employing more people. May not be just greed. Maybe cost increases are, and we're going to look at some of the factors that drive cost up for business as we get into professional sport. Go ahead and start reading the professional sport chapter, and you can look through module 3. If you didn't do this worksheet, it's good to have handy because you know you're going to be tested on it. Otherwise, have a great day, everybody.